This video isn't meant to be medical advice. I suggest you get that from professionals, not me. However, it is to talk about a conversation that we normally don't have on a typical skate session. So I recently took a webinar held by Good Push and Susie Chrome from the Ben Ramers Foundation that was all about suicide prevention, specifically for skateboarders. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about why skateboarders tend to get depressed and some specific things that lead that to happen. However, it's not to say that because you're depressed, you are suicidal or one or the other. Now, my objective is essentially talking about my experience, what I've done, and to elaborate on what I've learned from those sessions. Just kind of talk about things that I never even realized before. I'm actually going to list them all out. I'll leave chapters down below if there's any specific topics that you want to dive into without going into some of the other footage. We're going to be skating all over San Diego today while we dive into this topic. I recently learned that men are almost 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women. This is largely because they are much less likely to seek professional help or to speak about their mental struggles. I personally have experienced extreme mental health crisis. I've done things that have really helped me, but the work hasn't ended, nor do I think it'll ever end, but I've gotten better at controlling it. I'll share more about my personal experience after I talk about why I think skateboarders can become depressed. It's not to say every skateboarder is depressed, but these are signs that'll help us identify when friends or even ourselves are falling into a place of isolation. Credit to this breakdown does go to Anthony Papalaro. I'll leave a link to his blog down below. One of the first reasons that I'll dive into how skateboarders can get depressed is because skateboarding itself has a high risk and pain tolerance level. Inherently, if you want to get better at skateboarding, it is something that you're gonna endure. One of the things skaters pride themselves on is falling down and getting back up. It's part of the process of learning how to skateboard. Essentially, if you're not willing to take some risks, then you're not going to progress. This in return gives you a confidence boost that taking risks and accepting pain comes with a reward and payoff. The amount of dopamine that is rewarded to us after going through a mental battle of trying a trick for hours, sometimes days, gives us a high that the average person will probably only experience 1 or 2 times in their life, like getting married, for example. Now, that's not to say that all of that is bad, but it is important to identify in the framework of this conversation of how skateboarders can become depressed. Now, another one that might come to a surprise, and I'll explain it, is just the skaters' lack of general support that they have. We do have a big group of homies cheering us on whenever we finally land that trick battle, but it's more focused on what happens when we go home. What happens when we slam and don't have the big crowd of skaters telling us you got it? We tend to be very isolated. When I was 24, I went on a skate trip that lasted 2 months, some of which was out of the country. By the end of said trip, I felt more lonely in my life than I had ever felt. Even though I was around a group of 10 skaters every day that told me they loved me, I was desperate for something else. Now, that was mainly because I was just not comfortable with talking about my feelings and my insecurities, which, it took a long time to even understand. I was essentially trying to identify with everyone else and try to fit in versus really just coming to terms why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. So one thing that I think people probably even feel when they see this title is that this is a heavy conversation. I think that inherently creates an issue for skaters because it gives us this impression that we can't talk about this with other skaters or on the session. And I think that in itself is a big part of the problem. Now, another one that I've experienced, and I think pro skaters experience, amateur skaters, any skater could really experience, even the local skate park hero can experience, is just the pressure to perform when you're skateboarding. I'll just speak from my own experience on this one. For example, I have this YouTube channel. I love making skate videos. However, I've had times when I show up to a skate park and someone I've never met before is stoked on the videos I make. These moments are special and hard for me because I appreciate that someone took the time to watch my video, and for them to come over and say hi, I try to acknowledge that and be respectful of that. But sometimes I self-inflict pressure to perform. I'll roll into the skate park thinking I better turn up for the homie because he or she wants to see some ripping. This can be tough because the special thing that I truly enjoy is now meeting the expectations of others inflicted by myself. This could be the same for any local skate park ripper or anyone that's above average at skateboarding. Difference between athletes and skaters is that we're all on the same playing field for the most part. I doubt Michael Jordan was training at the local basketball courts where the locals were also watching his progression or regression. Another one that long periods of isolation. I think every skater can definitely attest to this. I mentioned a road trip I went on previously. Once that same road trip ended, I was alone. After 2 months of being around 10 plus skaters every day, I was back at home, which I didn't have a bedroom in at the time. The same goes for injuries, and not having your own typical routine of support around you can be extremely isolating and lonely. Another one that can be kind of self-inflicted, but it is the reality, is having anxiety from large groups. And if you're a skater that is performing or at any kind of amateur level, then you definitely have to experience this. Even at any level, really, at skateboarding, you have to kind of experience this if you have social anxiety like me. I've made videos about this in specific. Since I have more work to do on this, I'll keep it short and just say that even the best skateboarders in the world have anxiety showing up to a demo with tons of people around. This can be isolating to the point that I made previously about having these conversations. We often feel like we're alone with anxiety and have to deal with it on ourselves, which is extremely untrue. Risk of CTE is real. Between the late 20s and early 30s, the first form of CTE may cause mental health behavioral issues including depression, anxiety, impulsivity, and aggression. Not everyone is cool as Andy Anderson. That's just how it is. I've made more steps to wearing a helmet, but I'm not perfect. I'm trying to do better by wearing the brain bucket because life is cool. But the reality is most skaters don't wear a helmet. It's part of the freedom of choice that skateboard culture embraces, which comes with its fair share of consequences. Concussions suck, let me tell you what. I've had about like 8 or 9 concussions. Some actually happened here at this skate park, and I had a helmet on. So it's not to say like if you wear a helmet, you're excluded from this. I think if you wear a helmet, you can definitely still have concussions and still experience the same thing as if you didn't have a helmet on, essentially. So I think one of the biggest issues that we'll see in skateboarding that leads skaters into depression, then maybe into potentially suicidal thoughts, is substance abuse. It's so embedded in our skateboard culture. I think brands have a lot to do with exploiting skaters' substance abuse. Now, I don't want to say that skate brands are like solely responsible for skaters' substance abuse. However, I think they're a big role in it. I think they play a big role in it. Even Thrasher magazine, publications, they all play a big role in it because they're kind of telling skaters and younger people what they need to do to be accepted. And I think that's the big issue. It really comes down to amateur skateboarders being affected more than anybody else because they're the ones that have to adopt this identity. When I was younger, I looked up to Piss Drunks. I looked up to The End was one of my favorite skate videos ever. And in Heath Kirchhardt's part, Jeremy Klein's part, they're like drinking the whole time, skating at night, setting things on fire. The crazy part is when we look at the OG skaters, right? Like the people that really paved the way and the people that essentially created this identity that a lot of skaters try to associate with, like by smoking on the session, drinking on the session, and just like sort of doing what they see other people do that is accepted. I think a lot of those guys aren't doing it anymore. So I guess the point that I'm getting at is like maybe that should be the influence. Maybe your skaters should be looking at Andrew Reynolds and all these sober people now. Look at Brandon Turner now, look at these people that are like turning their lives around for the better, and they had to like face the reality of what was wrong. In almost all of those cases, it was substance abuse, which is the biggest problem, the biggest catapult to depression and then to potentially having those suicidal thoughts. Now, most people drink or smoke in these settings to kind of remove some of that social anxiety. That's normally it, and they feel like they can be themselves. At least that's why I drink, and that's why I smoked for the longest time on the skate sessions, is so that like I can feel like I can be more myself. But the reality is you're not being more yourself. Nobody's being more themselves when they're like drinking or smoking. They're just kind of like taking some of that edge and some of that anxiety off, which yeah, maybe sure that can help you land the trick or make you feel more like comfortable being in a setting that you're not comfortable in. However, that doesn't mean you're being your true self, and I think that's like a misconception often that like skaters, especially younger skaters, kind of think that like when you're smoking and drinking, that's just like who you really are, and it's not. You're detaching yourself from your own reality in those situations, and that's where you can become more depressed because you're losing touch with your own feelings, you're losing touch with your own self-worth. I think one of the big problems is like when skaters get this identity, or when they finally receive this identity that they wanted for so long, they then have to like carry that identity and adopt that identity, whether or not it was authentic or not. They have to like carry that out for their marketing, for their career, for their board graphics, or for whatever it may be. That kind of creates an identity, which then pigeonholes them into like sort of a certain way of acting and thinking around other people, which then makes them not being receptible to potentially being themselves and being more authentic and being more genuine, and not having to drink or abuse to like kind of escape the reality. So, you know, again, this isn't to like kind of make skaters look bad or anything like that. It's just to show that like as a culture, drinking and substance abuse is so embedded within our skate identity, and it's boring at this point. Like I'm so sick of seeing skate clips with B-rolls of people rolling joints and smoking and drinking. It's old. If you're a filmer and you're an editor, please just cut that stuff out. Ultimately, my goal with this video is to kind of provide some resources. One thing that hopefully you can take away from this is that it is not a heavy conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed this little video on skateboarders getting depressed and how we can tend to be more suicidal than the average person because of the inherent characteristics that come with skateboarding. If you enjoyed it, share it with your family, share it with your friends, anybody that skates. Really, I think it's important to have these kind of conversations on how, you know, we can be more prone to maybe be suicidal after depression because of the inherent capabilities. Like, I feel like I'm repeating myself right now, but yeah, I hope you all appreciate it. This isn't to make anybody feel, you know, attacked or anything like that. The objective of this is just to have open, vulnerable conversation and talk about things that we normally don't talk about on the session. If you could take one thing away from this video, remember, this isn't a heavy conversation. That makes it so like skaters can't feel like they can talk about this conversation. It's just a reality that we all live with. Appreciate you. I love you. MASH.